I'm delighted to be here today with Pavni Acharya. She's coming on the show on our Patient Matters spin-off shows to talk about her story, fascinating and interesting story of persistent pain in an adolescent. And I'm not exactly sure exactly what age Pavni is, but we heard of her story as a 16-year-old. I'm sure she'll be able to give us more details onto the timeline of this, but it was a really great article in Frontline magazine that was then brought to our attention on social media. And Pavni was sort of a testimonial within that piece about pediatric pain. And it was just really fascinating when we think about the episodes we've done on patient matters to date. They have been, I think the youngest in late 20s, the oldest in their 60s. And it's just important for us to understand some of the similarities and differences when we get into that adolescent age bracket. So, really appreciative of Pavni coming on the show. So, welcome to the show, Pavni. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me. My name's Pavni and I am 16. I was I was in year 11. I don't really know right now, but we're just kind of floating in between. And I've been experiencing persistent pain for quite a long time, and I'm currently recovering from it.
That's
Um,
brilliant.
I so I one of my physios asked me to write an article about how my pain journey, and um, it then got published into the CSP magazine. And I think, and obviously, I think the Physio Matters got in touch with me about talking to or sharing my story.
That's right. Yeah. So we got it shared fairly widely across social media, and it was really appreciated for you sharing that. So then your physiotherapists, we reached out tentatively to them just to say, do you think it'd be okay if we were wanting to make sure we weren't going to be offering and pressuring, and you came so highly regarded, so highly recommended to us by your therapist who had approached you, and you kindly offered to share it in this platform as well, which is a different one, but also really useful for people to understand, especially these days. You can imagine everyone's cooped up listening to podcasts and watching YouTube and all that sort of stuff. So this is going to be really valuable information for them for when they get back into practice, or for those that are needing to try and help manage these situations remotely, which is one of the things that you experienced as well by some of the email contact, which I'm sure we'll come into. But these are times where your stories are ever more relevant. So thank you so much for telling it. I want to try and jump right back to the start then, if we can, and sort of understand how your pain journey began. If there is it doesn't have to be a crucial point or a time frame or what have you, but if you would just start there for me, that would be useful.
So I think I was pretty young, maybe, I don't know, maybe 10, 9 or 10, and I was going, um, I'd just be walking around in town with my grandma, and I'd be experiencing like a lot of pain in my hip. And at the time, like we just thought it was because I was growing. I thought it was just because I was a small kid. And that was, when small children end up walking, they moan a lot. So we just thought it was one of those things. So, and then the pain faded for a little while. It didn't crop up for a couple of years, and then boom, and it was back. I was 12, and it was it was very dominant in my life. It got more and more painful, and the pain was more and more frequent as well. So my parents decided to take me to the doctors and to the GP, and it kind of all started from there.
Right.
uh,
Okay.
so um,
At that point, just out of interest, it might surprise some people, probably not on this show, but it might surprise some people if you spoke to sort of lay people, that when you go to seek medical attention for something like that, that is unusual, that is the start of a journey, whereas of course it was for you. Whereas some people would hope that that would conclude it, that I've got this confusing picture, I'll go and consult some experts in medicine that can help me to understand it and then resolve it.
yeah,
And that's what's such a shame in this case, but also a very typical story, is that actually begins the start almost of the journey rather than the end of it. Is that right?
yeah, that's right. It just, yeah, it was a lot of years of doctor's appointments, physio appointments,
Mm.
to get to where I am now. But
Mm.
so I went to the GP and they just told me they did like those Trendelenburg tests. I've had so many of those. And they just said to put some ice on it. They said that my muscle was like a bit inflamed or something, and so yeah, to just ice it or put heat on it. And I was like, okay, did that for a little while, but the pain was just getting worse and worse. So then I went to A&E and they did an X-ray and I looked, everything was fine. So the doctor was confused as well. He was like, maybe we can up the dosage on your Nurofen. And so he gave me a high dosage of ibuprofen to take as an anti-inflammatory. Um, and then the pain didn't subside. The ibuprofen wasn't making a difference. And so my dad booked another appointment for the doctors, went back to the GP, and this time the doctor told me to go to Isari, it's a big hospital. And yeah, kind of then everything got more and more busy, um, and less scattered, I guess, from there. We went to Isari and they did a couple of x-rays. Everything came out normal, but they were aware that I had this pain, but they couldn't quite pinpoint where it was coming from. So then they sent me to orthopedics, the orthopedics department, and I had a couple of appointments there. So there they said that I had bursitis and just snapping hip syndrome, and it was just they sent me for an MRI to check that there wasn't anything underlying, and it all came back normal. So told they referred me to the physiotherapists, and I did a few sessions of physiotherapy before I went back for my follow-up. And the pain was getting a little bit better, but it wasn't, it was quite a slow kind of process. And I don't know whether it was just because it was a new thing and I was feeling quite excited about it.
Right.
But it was, yeah, the pain had gotten like, I don't know, like a tiny little bit less. And so the doctors were happy with that. And then they called me back for follow-up and 6 months later, but the pain was getting worse as opposed to getting better. So they offered me steroid injections for the pain, and we refused. My dad said that that's not what we wanted to do. And so then they discharged me to the care of the physios, hoping that that would fix everything. And yeah, so then I was at physiotherapy for I think 2 years. It was weekly or fortnightly, and physiotherapy became I guess it became a very calming place for me, as opposed to, it became my solace in some senses, because I was obviously in my early teenage years and I was going through a lot of strange emotions, and it was really nice to have this little place that was just kind of almost, it was quite relaxing, it was me and my physio, and it was very, very routine. It became the same thing every week. Oh, this, you're not getting better, okay, we'll try this now, or they'll just check my legs, my movement. It was very routine, and I appreciated that, because it really helped my mental health, and it was something that was stable in my life when everything was changing.
No, that's really interesting. And what's interesting, especially, is that became that normality, that repetition became, as you say, relaxing rather than frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, there was obviously frustration in there, especially for my family, because
Sure.
they were like, "Why aren't you getting better?" Because there's nothing, you couldn't see anything wrong. There wasn't. There was almost like there wasn't. I mean, there was something physically wrong at the time, but it was kind of, "Why aren't you getting better? What are you not? You're not pushing yourself enough." Or there was this frustration involved, and kind of because they were worried about me. They were really worried. They didn't want me to suffer. So they were trying their own ways to get me to, get better, but it was causing a lot of frustration because I don't want to push myself. I knew that because at physiotherapy, I do my exercises. I do them like glute bridges and oh, can't even remember anything anymore, but I do them for like half an hour every day.
Wow.
And I'd get better. So we had an aim. It was like three kind of sets of 30 reps. That was our aim for like glute bridges. And I'd start on 3 glute bridges per night, and then I'd increase. But then I remember getting to like 26, and then I tried the next day, I just couldn't do it anymore. I was back to 3, and it was heartbreaking. And it happened so frequently as well that I'd get
Right.
better, and then I'd go back to square one.
And when you were getting better at those particular tasks, did that correlate with getting better broadly? With the things that were meaningful to you? Because I can't imagine you turned up day one and said, "I'd like to be better at glute bridges." I imagine that your pain was affecting you in different ways than that.
Yeah, I didn't go in thinking that I wanted to get better at glute bridges. I think the aim was to get back into PE, which I'd stopped, and I didn't end up doing until I was in year 11. So,
Wow.
um,
Okay. So how long were you? That's a good way for us to maybe talk about how this pain was affecting your day-to-day life. So outside of the sort of your medical and physio appointments, what? How long were you therefore not doing PE for?
so I think I stopped PE at the beginning of year 8, and I kept on with my dance club because I thought that was the one thing it was the one active bit of my life. And then I didn't do it until the start of year 11. So that was year 8, year 9, year 10, 3 years that I hadn't done it.
Okay. Wow. And now, what other things in and out of school? How did this pain affect you? And one thing I think we've managed to skirt over is it's predominantly sort of hip and pelvis pain that you were experiencing. Is that right?
Yeah.
And was it one side?
It started off on my right side. Yeah.
Right. And so yeah, tell me a little bit about what day to day, how this pain was affecting you day to day. How did it feel?
So I wouldn't be able to walk to school. I mean, I did push myself because I'm very concerned about the climate, and I was very kind of adamant that I didn't want my dad to drop me off, even though I was in a lot of pain.
Right, right.
But it did end up stopping me from walking to and from school. And I don't live that far from my school, so it was a 20-minute walk, but couldn't do that. Um, I could barely walk from one room to the next in the house. It became really, really painful. Um, Walking up the stairs, just walking anywhere, walking in general, it became a real issue for me. Um, and again, like if my friends wanted to go places, I'd have to kind of really think about it. Or can I actually do this? Is it going to be okay? Or what precautions do I need to take? Or what do I need to take with me to help me?
Right.
Um, yeah.
And
So
so when it comes to getting around school and things like that, obviously every school's different with regards to sort of stairs and how far it is between classes and stuff. Was that disruptive?
um, yeah, I guess it was. Yeah, I mean, my school's pretty small, so it wasn't. It could have been a lot worse, but
Right.
I think it was quite difficult walking in between classes and just yeah, walking up and down the stairs
Sure.
because yeah, I couldn't take the elevator because I didn't have a broken leg, um,
Right.
and I'd still have to walk because it's quite far from the elevators to the classes. So there was that walking. Walking was involved and everywhere. So
Hmm.
there wasn't much point.
You'd mentioned that by being into the system, you'd been sort of given a number of different explanations as to why you were experiencing pain, but then also then this period of time, especially once you were discharged from orthopedics into physiotherapy, and then saw physios weekly or fortnightly for the best part of 2 years. Then on what would be sort of a physical rehabilitation approach to trying to improve your sort of strength and conditioning. And I'm glad you had a positive experience within that in terms of your mental health and normality and being able to be active in a safe place. That's fantastic. But what was your understanding of your sort of diagnosis, and did that ever sit well with you in terms of what the explanations that were given and how that mapped onto your experience?
Um, so I was told that I had snapping hip syndrome, and I was like, okay, that makes sense. My hip snaps. I can feel it. I can hear it. Um, so that it made sense, but it did. The thing that didn't make sense is that normally people have this for 6 months and then they finish their physio and they're back to normal, and it's like it never happened. But for me, it was happening a lot, and I it was no one could give me an answer as to why that was happening so frequently and for such a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, so it was the fact that your situation wasn't turning a corner like had been described that made you then feel like the diagnosis didn't represent you as well as had been suggested initially.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I remember going on my last orthopedic appointment. The doctor said that I could have it for the rest of my life. So, I mean, it was kind of, but there wasn't an explanation as to why I was going to have
That's a brutal thing to just drop in there,
it.
isn't it? That's wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were your if we think about, just because we're definitely purposely hovering here before we get towards the sort of process of care that helped you most, I would say, from understanding your story, from what's been written in print and speaking to you briefly. Um, so before we get into that, but in this duration then where you've seen multiple different medical and healthcare professionals that have helped in some ways, but not necessarily in the broad picture, got you better or moved you towards a state of being better, still very disruptive in your life. What were the sort of some of the most positive and some of the most negative interactions that you had within the health system over that duration?
Um, I I guess I mean on as a whole it was pretty positive in terms of, I mean, they were very, very caring, and but I think I don't really know. I guess a negative would be that they didn't they didn't explore more areas of pain. So I feel like if they'd discovered that this was a chronic thing, like near the beginning, I wouldn't have had to be going to physio that wasn't really helping me physically. Um, and staying out of P for so long because um, I guess I think they should have, I guess, looked at other aspects of my life, and not just look at what were the hardcore kind of like the print on the paper, not just the MRI or not just the X-rays, because I'm sure a lot of people experience these things, or experience pain like mine. So I feel like if they'd, yeah, yeah, I guess that's it.
No, it's really interesting. That's familiar to the stories that we hear on a regular basis. Is that they maybe have seen the bigger picture,
Yeah,
and we'll definitely, once we've heard more about what then comes next and the positive turn that you took under guidance, we'll definitely come back to why that might have been. It'd be just interested in your thoughts as to what your thoughts are on how, because obviously episodes like this and shows like ours are to try to make sure we learn from our mistakes, and therefore, your equivalent. Not that of course, you've got your uniqueness. No one will be exactly like you, but people in your situation are then better served in months and years to come, and to make sure we're learning from those mistakes. And so, I definitely want to double back towards the end and find out what your thoughts are on how those things could be avoided in the future, or could have been even avoided in your case. But one of the things you'd mentioned so far is that the pressures and challenges on your family as well as you, and as well as the things that, of course, with your best interests at heart, the things that your family were doing or trying to suggest through you to try and change things. Could you just reflect on that a little bit? Like, what are your memories from way back that sort of remind you about the challenges and the ways in which your family needed to interact with your story as well as you did?
Yeah, so I think my dad was the one that took me to all my appointments, and you know, he was struggling with juggling his work and picking up my sister whilst I have an appointment, and it became quite strenuous for him. And bless him, he took me to every appointment. He took me everywhere. He wouldn't be like, oh, Worthing's too far from home. Like, he'll take me because he knew that it would help me get better. And they never made me feel like I was I was burdening them, which was good. But I know that there were strains on my family to kind of deal with my issue. I guess they did try to push me to do, because they weren't seeing results from physiotherapy. They kind of they were like, okay, why don't you try these exercises or do this every day? And I can't, like, I don't know, like these kind of yoga things, and I was like, okay, my leg doesn't move that way. I couldn't really, I didn't want to disappoint them, but for me, I knew that if I pushed myself too much, I was going to go back to square one. And I was very, very cautious around everything that I was doing. And it was kind of like me wanting to stop. They wanted me to push myself more, and I wanted to stop pushing myself so much, because I wanted to live in that safe little bubble. I didn't want to, again, who wants to be in pain? So I was just, and I think that it was there was the clashing between, obviously no one can understand your pain unless you have the pain, and they were trying to help, but there was the kind of clashing between, they weren't in my position. They didn't feel the pain I was feeling, and I couldn't really describe it either, because pain is such a weird thing to describe. Like, people ask you all the time, they're like, oh, is it a burning pain or is it a poking pain? I don't know what kind of pain it is. It's a pain.
It's my pain.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the things, the analogies that is used, and I don't know if it was perhaps I can't remember if it was someone that was involved in your care that's used it in this article that I found your story in, is this idea that you and your family and everyone involved in your care will have been on a roller coaster together. However, you're at the front of the roller coaster, and the experience from the back might be different, and that might be where your family's sat or at different parts of it. And I thought that was a really interesting point. Does that sort of resonate with you with regards to your story?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is so true. It does feel like they are on it with you, but they're not quite they're not quite feeling it the same that you are.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think you'd mentioned, and I'm delighted. I mean, such a loving and caring family to try and help you through this, and of course, in the end, did really contribute positively to your story. But you'd mentioned that you didn't feel like so they hadn't made you feel like you were a burden to them, even though you knew that there were real challenges, especially looking back. But did you ever, even though they were never making you feel that way, did you feel that, were you conscious of the impact you were having and the difference between yourself and your peers with regards to how you're interacting with the world over that time?
Yeah, definitely. I think I was very aware of, I'd never say, I'd apologize profusely. I'd be like, I'm so sorry that you have to take me here. And I think, I think it was just, I was very, very aware of the impact that I was having on my family and my friends, or kind of because I wouldn't be able to be my best friend's partner in PE or like netball or dance, because I would be slower than everyone else, or
Right.
I wouldn't be able to do it, or she'd have to go find someone else because I couldn't do it as well.
Okay.
So I was, yeah, I was super aware of that, and I did feel awful. But again, there wasn't any. I knew that there wasn't anything I could do about it. So,
Mm.
yeah.
How did because I don't want to make any assumptions. It certainly sounds like a challenge in every which aspect of your life, but I don't want to make any assumptions with regards to how it would have affected you more broadly. So I just want to ask explicitly, like, how was your mood around this time? Was it fluctuating? Was it something that was a huge drag on you? What would your sort of friends and family suggest as to how your general sense of self and mood was around that time, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, it's fine. I don't really know. I think I probably was in a bad mood more often because of the pain. Um, but I don't think my mood was like, I think I just accepted the fact that I couldn't do anything physical. Like I'd have to put away that kind of side of my life and just then focus on other things. And
Right.
I think it was good that I'd accepted it, I guess, because then I wouldn't feel like angry all the time or yeah.
Yeah, no, that's helpful to understand, and the word acceptance seems really relevant there. You know, speaking to people on this show in not dissimilar situations and timelines to yours, although just different in terms of age and life expectation is different, isn't it, around that time? But certainly those that were able to find some level of acceptance, reluctant acceptance at that time to sort of adapt, and then that they were the ones that seemed to be describing a yes, it disrupted your mood, but it wasn't as sort of insular making and depressive in an oppressive sense. Whereas those that were seeking the answer and were in a situation where they were naturally craving something different and weren't in acceptance of what had been suggested to them, then they were in a very challenging situation where it was just something that was going to just getting them down and dragging them down in a spiral sense. So one of the things that your situation led you to was that in time, so we're going to pick your story back up then, where you'd been seeing rehabilitative physios regularly, where you're trying to strengthen and improve your flexibility and just pace your conditioning, as have been described. And then what was the next stage then? What was there a moment where they said we've had an idea, or did you or your family find another angle or another opportunity? How did you then end up into a more holistic management and pain service?
So it was my physiotherapist at the time. She was like, okay, Pavni, we're not really getting anywhere, let's be honest. We've been on your case for years and we've had so many different physios come in and trying to figure out what was wrong with me in the hospital, but we're not getting anywhere. So I think it's time for you to, it's time to refer you to pain team. Um, so, I mean, normally these I think pain team people get referred to pain team after like 6 months of their illness, but I think with me, because it was like I was getting better and then I'd go back, that was why
Right,
they'd
right.
held off for a while. um so yeah, so she referred me to pain team, and then a couple months later I got my first appointment.
And that's where the article, of course, that I've read, that I encourage our listeners to have looked at, that really details some of the approaches and things. But instead of thinking broadly about what they do generically, we can obviously talk in this instance about what your experience was with that. So on that first appointment, what were the similarities and differences to other appointments that you'd had at this stage?
I think the biggest difference was that obviously there wasn't just one doctor, there were multiple healthcare professionals there. So I think there were one pediatric doctor, there was one, I think there was the physiotherapist, there was I think a therapist as well, um, uh, a psychologist, yes, I can't remember. Anyway, so I think that was the biggest difference, because I walked into a room with my dad and there were loads of people there, um, looking at me from all angles, which is the biggest, I guess, difference, because previously it would always be just a doctor looking at one aspect of my kind of one thing,
Right.
um, whereas now it was more like they were looking at every single thing that I did and analysing every single kind of part of my life.
And so, I can I can only try to, although I've been in those situations professionally, but obviously as a personally, I haven't, or any of my family haven't been there with them when they've had to experience it. But was it, when you go into a room like that, is it reassuring because you're getting all those different angles, or is it quite daunting as well? Like, because I wonder if you might feel, if it's not framed well, then you'd feel like you're in a bit of a goldfish bowl, I suppose.
I think um, I think it was. I think it wasn't. It was slightly daunting, but I think it was just the fact that I was so relieved to have finally, like, I knew that I had a feeling that this was just going to end it all, like, and I knew that if they couldn't find what was wrong with me, then no one could.
Right.
um, so I think I came in quite daunted by seeing so many people, but also quite reassured.
Okay, yeah, it can be both, can't it? Of course, but
Yeah.
no, but really, I'm heartened by the fact that that thoroughness came across, and that you felt like, all angles were being covered, and that you weren't necessarily just being seen through one particular lens, which you'd experienced over the years before it. So no, that's great. And so what did that entail then? What was either asked or done, or did you need to, what did it entail then?
So when we were in the waiting room, they, I think the a psychologist, she came and she gave me, like, this, my dad and I, a questionnaire about my mental health, and then I had another form that kind of talked about um, how far I could walk, or what I could physically do, and they'd taken that in and analysed it. And then when I went in, they, did the Trendelenburg test, um, and they kind of watched, like, my movements. I think the physiotherapist, she was very, very attentive to, like, even when I'd stand up or when I'd walked into the room, she was watching me, like, every second. Or if I'd gotten onto the, like, the little bed table thing, she was watching how I'd get onto it as well.
Mm.
Um, um, so yeah, and then I think they asked me about kind of just my history. Sorry. Um, yeah, I think that was that first initial meeting. And they were quite pleased with my movements because obviously I'd done 2 years of physiotherapy at my local hospital, and
You were able
that
to
had kept me quite
demonstrate a
agile.
dynamite glute bridge, I imagine. Like that's the thing you were able to say. Like, this is the best glute bridge you're ever going to see.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I think they were quite surprised that although I was in so much pain, I was pretty, like, I wasn't stiff,
And
and
capable,
I
yeah,
guess
yeah.
um, yeah. So I think, and it was because I was quite glad that physio hadn't completely stopped, because they'd focused, because even though my hips and my legs weren't getting better, they focused on my core, and I was fit in other ways, even though, like, my legs were were very, very weak.
Right. And so, what
Um,
was then suggested? So they do this assessment. It's very thorough. Various different aspects of your life are being considered, which is great and reassuring. What did they then suggest? Was it in that appointment that they made suggestions as to what they felt was going on, or was it that they then said, right, come back at a later date, and then they sort of sat you down and gave you the sort of the analysis? How did it work?
so they just told my dad and I to leave for about 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes, and then they called us back in, and that was they just like conversed about it, and it was just, they just came in and they were like, okay, we know what you have. And I was like, oh, this is great then. I mean, it was kind of I wasn't it was I didn't feel like I'd accept, like, when they told me I had chronic primary pain, I kind of it didn't feel like it was the end, because this journey had been going on for so long. It was
Sure.
like a never-ending road. um and it it was so strange to hear someone say that, "No, this is what it is and this is why." It was the fact that my brain had gotten so used to pain that it was making it up. And it made sense a little bit. At the time, I felt quite confused. I must like it made sense, but it was still really confusing because I was like, why would it do that to me? And
Sure.
so um,
When you have because there's some geeky academic debate within our profession and the wider sort of pain therapies, pain science atmosphere for us to try and make sure that we work out how can we mitigate the confusion and enhance the understanding of those moments. And one of the things with that is that was it something that was helpful to understand this as being sort of a neurological your brain is playing tricks on you, for want of a better term, or was that sometimes, like you say, you know, why would it be doing that? Was that almost like a daunting thing that your body would be disrupted in that way? How did it? What on the balance of things, was that a positive or a negative?
um, I think it was, I don't really know. It kind of had, it was positive in the fact that it is something, but it was also negative in the fact that it's not something you can fix because it's neurological. You can't go in there and fix it.
Right.
And I obviously struggled to understand it at the time because it was so strange and it was like, boom, this is it.
Sure.
And so they realized that I was quite, I think that they did notice that I was quite frazzled. And so they sent me some videos
Right.
on this. They sent me like a video by Laura Mosley and a couple of them, and it made sense because there was this one with like this wolf, Beat the Beast, or I
Taming
can't
the
remember the.
Beast. Yes, I'm
Yes,
aware
that's
of it.
it.
Yeah, of course. Right.
Yeah, and I think looking at it visually, it helped me understand this, understand what I had better when I was in a
Right.
calmer environment.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's helpful. And I think there's something very therapeutic about Lorimer Mosley's accent and manner as well. I think that seems to be a bit of a je ne sais quoi about him that really is particularly helpful. So I'm glad that you found those resources useful. And so, what other measures from that point then were put in place to help you recover, to understand your problem as well as to move forward? And how did that differ then from your experiences to that point?
So that as I said, they sent me those videos, and I was literally just told to, over the summer, go watch a movie or go do things that were fun, um, without thinking about my pain or thinking about it. Kind of like, so at the time I was experiencing a lot of lower back pain, or sitting for, I don't know, maybe half an hour was too much for me. Um, so I couldn't walk, couldn't sit either. I didn't really have much to do. But they told me to go and watch movies to help me kind of look at, kind of make me think of something else other than the pain, or to focus on something else. Um, and that was kind of the first thing for me, the first step. And then I had a couple of email conversations with the physiotherapist, and I met her again a couple months later, and we just kind of we went through. She told me, she said to me, "Okay, so if you were going to wake up tomorrow and you were pain free, there was nothing wrong with you, what would you do?" And it was, I think that, yeah, I came up with like, I think running a marathon, or dancing or swimming breaststroke, which I previously couldn't do because of my hip pain.
Right.
Um, and I think she was like, okay, you can do all of that, but you just need to do it step by step. And so we had like a medical mountain or a ladder, and we'd written down kind of the steps or the small things that I could do. So like, I don't know, going on a walk, a brisk walk, and then I don't know, jogging between lampposts, kind of to build it up to the kind of end goal, which was to run, I don't know, 5K or something,
Yeah.
or do a park run. Or I can't remember.
Sure.
But it was kind of, it was one of those. I think it helped because it was very, very. It wasn't kind of this is the end kind of goal. There were smaller goals in between,
Right.
and it made it feel like I could reach it a lot better. And it kind of it made me feel a lot more, I guess, encouraged because I knew it wasn't that far. I knew I could run, I could walk, I would be able to walk. I don't know, for 10 minutes. It was one of those things, I think.
Yeah, so breaking the goal setting aspect of it was really quite helpful by the sound of things, and that's really promising that you were able to have those things get identified and broken down, and then help you build back up to them. So the one of the things that you were pursuing before when you were doing sort of rehabilitation based, gym based physio is that you're pursuing strength of a muscle or improving a movement or flexibility or getting more repetitions, as you described it, of exercises such as a glute bridge or something quite particular. Whereas this has been reframed in something that was sort of sections of a task that is meaningful for you. At that stage, did that just feel like it was sufficiently different and specific, sufficiently more relevant to you to be something that was worth pursuing?
Yeah, definitely. I think it because I was putting things more into context of my life. Um, it was more kind of it's more reassuring that I would be able to do these normal things rather than looking at kind of glute bridges because I wasn't going to do glute bridges for a living. Um, so I think that was very, very helpful.
Yeah, well, if it was an Olympic sport or a profession, then yeah, you'd be well quids in. I think in months where I'm sure you've been a pro. We had someone else on the show on Patient Matters who had a similar experience with the clamshell exercise, something that I'm sure you've had some experience with as well. And he just said that if clamshelling was an Olympic sport, then he'd be the champion. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's maybe familiar with you with the glute bridge. Um, when you're going through this process of then scaling your tasks, your abilities, were there any points in which it became, how did the pace of it feel? I suppose is the better way of me phrasing that question. Like, did it feel like it was too slow, too fast? Did it feel like it got interrupted at times?
I thought it was pretty fast. Because again, there were smaller goals. There was a smaller distance to go in between them.
Right.
Um, and I think I think there were interruptions because I don't know, I couldn't always go out on a walk because of the weather or because I'd gone swimming that day.
Sure.
Um, it was, yeah, but I think overall it was pretty fast getting in between those kind of goals because I remember I think maybe within 2 months I called up my physiotherapist and I was like, okay, we can book another session because she told me, she was like, once you get to number 3 on your on this ladder, call me and then we can go through this together. We can go on a little jog. And I was like, oh, okay.
Cool. Right.
So again, I panicked at the time because I was like, I'm not going to be able to do that. But
Right.
because I'd gone through the steps in between, 2 months later, I was like, okay, I can come in. And so, yeah, I went in for that was my last session, and we went for a jog, and I was, I think she could see that my mental kind of, my outlook on pain had changed so much, and I was feeling so much more positive about what I would be able to do in the future.
Did her confidence help you with that then? Because to be told, like, I'll see you when you're at 3, not if you manage to get to 3, which would be brilliant, then maybe give me a call. It's not, it's a different mindset from the therapist. So, did her confidence sort of rub off on you?
Yes, definitely. I think me as a person, I think I'm very kind of, um, I have confidence in myself, but when people have, or people show that they have confidence in me, it makes me feel a lot more kind of like I know that I will be able to do it because other people think it.
Right.
Yes. So definitely her confidence and encouragement helped me a lot, mentally as well.
Right.
Um,
No, that's really good. And One of the things that I understand from your case is that this wasn't something that when you were into the pain management services, beyond your sort of diagnostic assessment and things like that, once they'd shared with you the take of it and moved you into then pain management services, it wasn't as if you were in there for the weekly and fortnightly for several years either, was it? It was actually relatively speedy in terms of and also not particularly many sessions. I think 3 sessions, and then managed in the interim by email. Am I right in
Yeah,
understanding it that way? And so that obviously especially relevant for therapists at the moment that are needing to try to arm's length manage and see fewer patients face to face as we're in this crazy isolation quarantine period. For those that are listening years down the line, we're right in the thick of the COVID-19 lockdown. So the ability for therapists to manage and help people remotely is important. So you've obviously got some experience of that. Did you feel like you were still involved? Your care was still very involved, even if it was just back and forth on email.
definitely. I think I was a little bit skeptical. I think I like things that are face to face. I prefer things that are face to face, but I didn't feel like the care was kind of it wasn't. I think it was definitely. I was given the same amount of care that I would have been given if we were face to face. I think she really uh, put the detail and the kind of her confidence did shine through in her emails, um,
Right.
and it was very very reassuring for me as well because there
And then
wasn't
it was. Oh, sorry, go on. Go
no
ahead.
there wasn't any pressure to kind of to know that I had to get to this point in between. You know, say if she'd already booked a second session, there wasn't any like there would be pressure for me to do these specific things in between these sessions. Like I know that, like for example, I'd feel like I'd have to be able to run 5K in between these 2 sessions. And if I was just learning how to walk, I couldn't run 5K. And I think the emails were quite, it made things less daunting as well.
Brilliant. No, that's really really helpful. Now, in terms of from you being assessed in pain management services, um, the what sort of time frames was it from that point to you getting back to a sense of your normality and considering yourself well on the road to recovery?
Um, Maybe about 6, 7 months. I think I was, oh, really, I guess as soon as I'd met them, because I was it felt so good to know what was kind of what was wrong with me, I guess. It really pushed me to do the things that they were telling me to do. So like go to the park or go watch a movie. I think my recovery started from that first session. And then obviously the more quicker recovery, the more speedy and more, I guess, kind of the more important recovery in terms of like me being able to walk and run. It came after the second session, so maybe 4 months time, and yeah, I think it just went from there, and I was getting a lot more better. I was definitely I could you could see that I'd come miles from where I was when I first went to see them just in those 4 months because I knew what I had to do in order
Right.
to get
And
better.
how are you now?
Currently I'm very well, I think. I I've started to do the couch to 5K. I'm on week 2, except now that I think because of the virus, I've been kind of cooped up in my house and my parents aren't letting me go out for a run. But I think I think the fact that I was able to run, you know, for I don't know, but the fact that I was able to start doing my couch to 5K
Yeah, for
is a
sure.
big thing. Um,
Fabulous. And when
yeah,
when we think about the timing then, and one of the reasons I asked that question is because it might surprise people considering the length of time that you had symptoms as well as the length of time that you'd had other care that hadn't helped. Then that might feel like a relatively short period of time that you were then able to turn a corner and start to build your ability again and start to feel like you're on the road to recovery, if not recovered. So did that surprise you also? And also, I just wondered, like friends and family, how did they respond to the sort of new diagnosis, new process, that sort of stuff?
I think it was. I did feel like it was kind of like, oh, is that it? Kind of. I'd spent so many years in pain, and then it just, within 4 months, it was the pain. Like I was able to do more. The pain was
Yeah,
still there, but I was
right.
doing more. And I think that was quite surprising. And I think my family were just glad to see that I was getting better so quickly. I think they were just relieved more than rather than thinking about
Was there
anything
ever any
else.
points where sometimes people reflect on struggling to, people find it easier to comprehend, say, snapping hip or something mechanical than they are something more holistic or considered to be sort of, in this instance, described to you as neurological? Was that was that difficult for people, friends, family?
I think, yeah, I think for it was harder to understand, especially for like my grandparents, because they're kind of like, it's almost like, what's wrong with your brain, Pavni? Like, what have you done to it?
Right.
um, so it was. I guess they were quite scared that I was. They thought I'd gone mad.
Okay.
I'd gone mad, and I obviously hadn't. I was just. It was just. Um, yeah. So I think it definitely was harder for my grandparents to comprehend, or um, I guess my parents as well, or even me, like myself. I found it quite strange because, like, as I said, it's not something tangible. It's not something that I can pull some
Yeah.
wires and fix. It was something that it was there, and I had to mentally overcome this issue.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because it's sometimes harder to comprehend, but obviously once the proof is in the pudding, once they see you being able to do more, then clearly it's onto something, and it sort of proves itself. Especially when it's something that turns a corner as quickly as yours did, then it doesn't take a lot to persuade people that you're on the right lines. Once you're able to sort of you're back running, back swimming, and back doing what you love. Now, is it in as the current situation lies? Then do you feel that this is something that you have, the pain is the same but now more manageable because of what you're doing, or is it that the actual pain has improved also?
Um, I think the pain has improved. Oh, I don't really know. I guess I don't really look at it in terms of kind of, oh, I don't wake up every morning, I'm like, oh, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain am I in today?
You'd be
I
sick of
think
that
it's
question. That's one
I
reason.
think yeah. um I think the I think my abilities have increased. I think the pain is always there. I mean, sometimes it isn't there, and that's great. But I think um, mostly is there. But I push it aside, and I focus on more. I focus more on um, what I'm doing, and um, I guess my
Mm.
actions
If we
in some
if we
sense.
throw it back, because I said I'd try and come back to it once we understood your story in its fullest, to why it might have been, or what opportunities there were to try and make this a 6 month story, or even shorter than it being a 3 or 4 years and 6 month story. What do you think were the opportunities that were missed, or why do you think that occurred?
Um, I think that um, I don't think people are aware of this of pain being neurological. I think people associate pain with something physical or tangible, and I think that in itself is, I think, a big issue. And I think because people don't associate pain with something with something neurological, people or they tend to miss these things out, because they're so focused on looking at trying to find something physical or something literally wrong um, with your body. They're not looking at your brain, or and again your pain itself.
No, that's really interesting.
it's not seen.
Sorry, overlap there. I didn't mean to interrupt. Um,
um, oh, I think it's just not seen as it's seen as an effect rather than the cause or a kind of a source. And I think it's important to start changing views on that.
word primary is something that you've used both in this podcast and also been described to you as part of the diagnostic picture. That is something that seems quite relevant here in that it's not something that's just being a symptom of a problem, but it can be a primary problem. And that is
Yeah,
something that seems to make a difference to you and to others, is that really reframes what the pain is, so that you're not then chasing this sort of mythical answer that might be somewhere else in the tissues or in the structures or in the biomechanics or in the intricacies of a glute bridge. So no, that's
yeah.
do you, because if I was to, obviously it can be a bit of both or a third thing, but if I was to say that it's that people didn't recognize the, if you had to think that the therapists and physicians, the GPs, all the people that you met in the first couple of years at least, would you say that it's they didn't recognize the diagnosis that was correct in you, or it's that they don't have a good comprehension of the diagnosis in a general sense in order to recognize it?
I think it's the latter. I don't think that they had a general sense of the diagnostic, um, because I'm sure if they did, then it would have. Like I was looking back at some of my notes the other day, and um, there were so many red flags now that I look back at it. Like, how did I do my bronze DOV when I was in so much pain, but then not feel affected by, like, I'm not in immense pain after it. Like, it just felt like a normal person doing their DOV. It wasn't like, it didn't feel like it was extra painful because of my legs and my hips. It was just, I think that there were so many red flags, and I think people would have, or other healthcare professionals would have picked up on it had they been aware of
Because the
the
context
diagnostic.
seemed to really matter to your symptoms when you look back at it, regardless when it
Yeah,
particularly hurt, when it particularly didn't, and surprisingly didn't. It was because of the context
yeah,
of something being enjoyable and social and all the things that enriched your life. So fascinating, especially for you to be able to look back and notice that now. And it is such a shame that it wasn't picked up early, but as long as we can learn from these lessons. What would you say then would be your top tips to, because obviously the vast majority of our listeners are health professionals, therapists in musculoskeletal care and pain services generally. What would you say the top tips are for everyone listening to this would want to try to decrease the timeline at the very least and help as many people like you as possible? What would your top tips be to them?
um, look at the context of your patient's pain. I think that is super important, because you'll find things that you wouldn't have previously picked up on, because it's not a physical thing. Um, and I guess be open to these ideas, or make sure to look at the bigger picture, rather than, again, just uh, kind of looking at things with a needle view, like with a needle point view. I think it's super important to kind of, I guess, like my English teacher would say, look down from the heavens, kind of at everything.
Mm. Get an overview.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
fantastic. No, it's really interesting. Now, something that I didn't, when we were planning this interview, I did not think I'd be asking these questions at the end, but it seems suddenly very useful. We're talking about context. We currently live in unprecedented context of lockdown and social distancing and isolation and some of the things that you've been countering in many ways. You've been trying to be more sociable, more active, more engaged with the outside world. And so as we're in this, as a consequence of COVID-19 and making sure that we avoid the spread of the virus, we're all doing less and having significantly modified lives. I just wanted to ask you then a couple of questions about, especially in the time frame and trajectory of your recovery. How are you feeling and managing around that in the current situation we find ourselves in?
So it's definitely been a little bit more challenging because I'm having to constantly kind of think about where I can and where I can't go for say my runs or a walk. And I think it's definitely challenging because I don't want to stop completely, but I also don't want to be sick. I don't want to
Mm.
catch the virus. So it's kind of given me kind of like a almost like an ultimatum. You can either do this or you can do this. And I'm finding that quite difficult at the moment because I'm itching to go out and go for a run, but I also kind of I have to fight that urge to do that because it's very important that I
Mm.
don't get
Yeah,
unwell.
and have you been do you feel at this point in time you've been able to avoid it provoking a setback for you more broadly?
Um, yeah, I think I have. I think I'm trying to do other things instead, um, or finding new ways to keep active in the house rather than going out. Because I guess, I mean, before we all got locked down, I was walking to and from school, which whether or not I was doing anything else, that was also a big kind of part of my life. And obviously now that I can't even do that, I am literally stuck in
Yeah.
my house. It's kind of encouraged me to find different ways to do things, or I don't know, maybe I think yesterday I was playing badminton. Um, I think different things. It is hard at the moment because, as I said, it's I don't want to stop. I don't want to have a setback. But then you have to try and find different ways to keep active and keep on with
Yeah,
your
for sure.
recovery.
And I think you'd mentioned at the start about how it's going to be so disruptive to pretty much every person in the world right now. But for people in year 11, in March of their final year of school, like I'm not quite old enough to not remember those times and remember how important that is and how crucial that is as a bridge to later life and to future study and things like that. So that's it's impressive that you've not descended into a state of major anxiety, which would be understandable for you and many of your peers in this situation. But with as someone in this, specific to our context of conversation, being someone who's in recovery from persistent pain, is it something that you have to work extra hard to not let that sort of get you down, drag you down, or is it just that you feel actually you're in the same boat as a lot of your peers and that you don't see it as being relevant, the fact that you're someone that has had a condition that you're working through?
I think I am in the same boat as a lot of my peers. I think you should have seen me a couple of weeks ago. I was a mess. There was a lot of anxiety. I think because I'm a very studious person, I really, really enjoy school and I really, really enjoy education. So once, and obviously kind of the social and I guess the kind of like physical aspect of school, like doing things like PE and going to the gym or the leisure centre. I think that was um, again, it was kind of because it was such a blunt stop to everything, it did cause a lot of anxiety for me. But I think now that the government has sorted out the grade issue, I think it's kind of brought the anxiety down a bit. It's yeah, because I know that I did well in my mocks. I know that I was working really hard, and I know that I'm going to get my 9 that I wanted in geography. I don't feel like I don't think I am robbed of it
Right,
just yet.
right, yeah.
um,
I think it's go
but
on, sorry,
physically,
physically. No,
sorry,
sorry.
no,
I
sorry.
was just going to say that the strange circumstances where folk your age shouldn't be waiting for politicians' broadcasts in the evenings, but you needed some reassurances and assurances on all sorts of different aspects that are very specific and very particular to your circumstance. I'm glad that you've got some of those. I know that it's not all going to be, it will all hopefully come out in the wash. You won't get left out hanging out for dry. But I think it's really important that and reassuring for us to hear that it's not that you're seeing this as being something that is hugely disruptive to your pain story that then sets you back enormously, because it's a concern. I know for many that this would be enough to sort of tip the scales the other way and start to regress, and I'm delighted to hear that that's not the case with you.
Yeah, I think it's definitely you have to know that it's your life and you have to be able to um, find other ways to deal with the situation so that it doesn't affect your recovery from your um, pain or illness. Because at the end of the day, it's your body, it's all down to you, and it's your choices that are going to affect your
Yeah, it was
recovery.
interesting, and probably an interesting final question for me then is we talk a lot about responsibility and distributed responsibility on this show, and you've mentioned there about the fact that you're in charge and you're in someone that needs to take charge of your own decision making and your choices that you make that might affect you. Um, do you feel that that was something that was relevant, the responsibility aspect of it, relevant to your success in your later stages of care and your lack of success earlier on?
Yeah, definitely. I think because I was told that it was pretty much all down to me, that I was the one that was um, taking these steps, or I was the one. I had to do this kind of. I had to move from up the ladder on my medical mountain or whatever by myself. It was kind of. I knew that it was me, and because again, I guess it was kind of a good thing that um, that these appointments weren't as frequent, because it did push me to do things by myself rather than knowing that I could just call up, or I had an appointment like every week, kind of like previously with my physiotherapy at my local hospital. I knew that I could just call them up and be like, oh, can I come in next week? Or I knew that I had an appointment next week. So I was very reliant on these other people. But because a lot of it, the communication with my later care was done by email, I knew that it was again down to me to actually do the things that were I was being asked to do.
Mm. Yeah, there is something to be said for that as appointments get spaced out, or as there is a physical distance sometimes between both appointments and people, means that it naturally has to fall on your shoulders to some extent. And I'm delighted that you then, took that on yourself and have been able to make the recovery you have. Is there anything else that you'd like to add at this stage before we wrap up?
Um, no, I think that is it. I think people just need to um, be responsible and trust themselves and trust their abilities. I think that was a huge thing for me. I wasn't trusting myself to do the right thing, or um, and I think it changed once I went to see pain team, and they kind of reinstalled that trust in myself and the confidence in my legs, because they knew that I knew that I could do it, and I could overcome
Yeah,
this.
I think one of the things I've been just to hear this now in detail, but also reading about your story, is that I'm heartened about how much they were just trusting your maturity to not dumb things down, or not to try to micromanage it, or try to sort of baby the situation and sort of suggest that you needed to be sort of handheld or guided in a particular way that might not have they might not have done in other people. I think that's really nice to hear, the fact that they trusted you and you were able to start building trust in yourself and develop that self-efficacy again. I'm really pleased to hear that, because there's sometimes stories of people being just assuming that you needed more hand-holding, more guidance, more specifics, and therefore you didn't develop that autonomy and responsibility. So I'm over the moon that you've had that success, and from hearing it now in detail, I can so see how that was mapped out, how the puzzle pieces came together on that, and why you've been such a success story. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. It's been a pleasure to chat to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers.